Cameroon, a nation on the coast of Central Africa, bears the scars of a fractured past. The country's history is etched with the complexities of colonial rule, leaving a legacy of division that continues to shape its present. From 1884 to 1916, Germany held Cameroon as a colony. After World War I, the territory was divided between British and French mandates, sowing the seeds of a linguistic and cultural divide that would have lasting consequences. The year 1960 marked a turning point as French Cameroon gained independence. A year later, the southern part of British Cameroons opted to join French Cameroon, forming the Federal Republic of Cameroon. This union, however, proved fragile. In 1972, a referendum abolished the federal system, centralizing power and further marginalizing the Anglophone regions. This shift towards a centralized state ignited deep-seated grievances among the Anglophone population. Concerns over linguistic and cultural assimilation, coupled with perceptions of economic and political marginalization, fueled resentment towards the Francophone-dominated government. The Anglophone regions, once vibrant centers of their own, felt increasingly like outliers in their own nation. The decades that followed saw simmering tensions erupt in sporadic protests and calls for greater autonomy. The Anglophone community, feeling increasingly unheard and unrepresented, began to demand a return to a federal system. These demands, however, were largely ignored or met with repression, further deepening the chasm between the two communities. The long-simmering tensions in Cameroon reached a boiling point in late 2016. A seemingly innocuous trigger, the appointment of French-speaking magistrates and teachers in the Anglophone regions, ignited a wave of protests that would forever alter the country's trajectory. For the Anglophone community, this act was the final straw, a blatant symbol of their marginalized status within the nation. Lawyers, frustrated with the imposition of a legal system they saw as foreign and unjust, took to the streets. Teachers, dismayed by the undermining of their language and culture in the classroom, joined the chorus of dissent. What began as peaceful demonstrations quickly escalated as the government responded with a heavy hand. Security forces met the protesters with tear gas, batons, and live ammunition. The brutal crackdown, documented by human rights groups, only served to further inflame the situation. As casualties mounted, the protests morphed from expressions of discontent to a full-fledged movement for self-determination. The government's attempts to quell the unrest through internet shutdowns and the deployment of military forces backfired spectacularly. The crackdown, far from restoring order, only solidified the resolve of the Anglophone population. The year 2016 marked a turning point, a point of no return, as the struggle for linguistic and cultural rights morphed into a fight for an independent state. On October 1, 2017, the Anglophone regions of Cameroon witnessed a historic moment. After months of escalating protests and brutal crackdowns, the Ambazonia Governing Council, a separatist group, declared the independence of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia. This declaration, a direct challenge to the authority of President Paul Biya's government, marked a pivotal escalation in the conflict. The date, chosen to coincide with the anniversary of the unification of British Southern Cameroons with French Cameroon, was laden with symbolism. It represented a rejection of the Union, a reclaiming of a perceived lost sovereignty. The declaration, met with cheers from supporters and condemnation from the Cameroonian government, set the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict. Sissokou Julius Ayuk Tabe, a charismatic leader who emerged from the ranks of the independence movement, was sworn in as the first president of the self-declared republic. The declaration, while largely symbolic in the face of the Cameroonian government's superior military might, galvanized the Anglophone population, providing a rallying cry for those who felt their voices had been silenced for too long. The international community, however, largely remained hesitant to recognize Ambazonia's declaration of independence. The African Union, wary of setting a precedent for secessionist movements across the continent, condemned the declaration and called for dialogue. Despite the lack of international recognition, the Declaration of Independence marked a point of no return, setting in motion a chain of events that would plunge the region into a spiral of violence and unrest. At the forefront of the Ambazonian independence movement stood Sissokou Julius Ayuk Tabe, a former healthcare worker thrust into the role of a revolutionary leader. A charismatic figure with a talent for mobilizing the masses, Ayuk Tabe became synonymous with the struggle for an independent Ambazonia. Born in 1965 in the English-speaking region of Cameroon, Ayuk Tabe's journey to becoming the face of a revolution was an unlikely one. He initially pursued a career in healthcare management, working for several years in Nigeria. However, the growing unrest and marginalization of Anglophones in his homeland drew him back to Cameroon, where he felt compelled to take a stand. Ayuk Tabe's leadership transcended his role as a political figure. He became a symbol of hope and resilience for a people yearning for self-determination. His speeches, often delivered with a mix of fiery rhetoric and measured pronouncements, resonated deeply with the Anglophone population, particularly the youth who saw in him a beacon of change. However, his time as the president of the self-declared republic would be short-lived. In January 2018, in a move that sent shockwaves through the movement, Ayuk Tabe and several of his close aides were arrested in Abuja, Nigeria. Their arrest, shrouded in controversy and allegations of Nigerian complicity with the Cameroonian government, marked a major blow to the Ambazonian independence movement. Section 5. Voices silenced, imprisonment, and the struggle for justice. The arrest and subsequent extradition of Sisiku Julius Ayuk Tabe and his aides to Cameroon marked a turning point in the Ambazonian struggle. Charged with terrorism and secession, they were subjected to a trial widely condemned by international observers as politically motivated. The trial, held in a military court rather than a civilian one, raised serious concerns about due process and the rule of law. In August 2019, Ayuk Tabe and 9 of his supporters were sentenced to life imprisonment. The verdict, met with outrage by their supporters and human rights groups, was seen as a blatant attempt to silence dissent and crush the independence movement. The trial and sentencing of the Ambazonian leaders exposed the brutal realities of President Biya's regime, a regime accused of resorting to authoritarian tactics to maintain its grip on power. Despite their imprisonment, the Ambazonian leaders, particularly Ayuk Tabe, remained potent symbols of resistance. Their resilience in the face of adversity, their unwavering commitment to their cause even from behind bars, served as a source of inspiration for a movement grappling with the loss of its figurehead. Their continued detention, however, highlighted the high stakes of the conflict and the lengths to which the Cameroonian government was willing to go to quash dissent. The imprisonment of Ayuk Tabe and his comrades, far from extinguishing the flames of the independence movement, had the opposite effect. It fueled resentment, deepened distrust in the government, and strengthened the resolve of those fighting for an independent Ambazonia. The struggle, it became clear, was far from over. Section 6. A heavy toll casualties and displacement in Ambazonia. As the conflict in Cameroon's Anglophone regions rages on, it is the civilian population that bears the brunt of the violence. The once peaceful regions have been transformed into battlegrounds, leaving behind a trail of death, displacement, and destruction. The human cost of the conflict, often overlooked amidst the political complexities, is staggering. According to estimates by human rights groups, over 6,000 people have lost their lives in the violence. The actual number, however, is likely far higher, as access to the conflict zones remains restricted and many deaths go unreported. The conflict has unleashed a wave of brutality, with both sides accused of committing atrocities against civilians. Over 1 million people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes in search of safety. Many have sought refuge in neighboring Nigeria, while others have been internally displaced, living in precarious conditions in makeshift camps or with host families. The conflict has exacerbated existing vulnerabilities, pushing communities already grappling with poverty and limited access to basic services to the brink. The education system in the Anglophone regions has been decimated, with schools closed and teachers fleeing the violence. Children, caught in the crossfire, have been denied their right to education, their futures hanging in the balance. The conflict has created a generation scarred by trauma, their lives forever altered by the violence they have witnessed. Section 7. International echoes, responses, and controversies. The ongoing conflict in Cameroon's Anglophone regions has drawn increasing international attention, albeit belatedly. Human rights organizations have documented widespread abuses committed by both sides, calling for an end to the violence and a peaceful resolution to the crisis. The United Nations, while urging dialogue, has been criticized for its perceived inaction in addressing the root causes of the conflict. The African Union, often accused of prioritizing the principle of territorial integrity over the protection of human rights, has faced criticism for its muted response to the crisis. Some regional actors, however, have taken a more proactive stance. The Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS, has attempted to mediate between the Cameroonian government and separatist groups, albeit with limited success. The conflict has also sparked controversy beyond the African continent. In May 2025, Cameroonian-born singer Libyanka found herself at the center of a political firestorm after displaying the Cameroonian flag during a performance. Ambazonian activists accused her of supporting President Paul Biya's regime, leading to the postponement of her world tour. The incident highlighted the global reach of the conflict and the sensitivities surrounding any perceived endorsement of either side. Despite growing international pressure, the Cameroonian government has largely resisted calls for meaningful dialogue and inclusive solutions. The international community's response, characterized by condemnation and calls for restraint, has thus far failed to translate into concrete actions to address the root causes of the conflict or hold perpetrators of human rights abuses accountable. Section 8. Calls for dialogue, seeking peace in the midst of conflict. Amidst the ongoing violence and political stalemate, calls for dialogue and a peaceful resolution to the crisis in Cameroon's Anglophone regions have grown louder. Civil society organizations, religious leaders, and prominent figures within the Anglophone community have consistently advocated for a negotiated settlement, recognizing that a lasting solution cannot be achieved through military means. These calls for dialogue, however, have often been met with resistance from both sides. The Cameroonian government, viewing the separatists as terrorists, has been reluctant to engage in any form of negotiation that could be perceived as legitimizing their demands for independence. Some factions within the Ambazonian movement, disillusioned by decades of marginalization and distrustful of the government's intentions, have remained committed to the armed struggle, viewing dialogue as a sign of weakness. Despite the challenges, there have been glimmers of hope. In recent years, there have been tentative attempts at dialogue, facilitated by international actors. These talks, while yet to yield any concrete breakthroughs, represent a step in the right direction, demonstrating a willingness from some quarters to explore peaceful avenues for resolving the conflict. Key figures within the Anglophone community, including imprisoned leaders like Sissokou, Julius Ayuk-Tabe, have emphasized the importance of dialogue as a pathway to peace. They have called for an inclusive process that addresses the root causes of the conflict, including the historical grievances and demands for greater autonomy. Section 9. The road ahead, uncertain future, enduring hope. The path towards peace and reconciliation in Cameroon's Anglophone regions remains fraught with challenges. The conflict, now in its 8th year, shows no signs of abating, and the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate. Deep-seated mistrust between the warring parties coupled with the complex political realities makes finding a lasting solution a daunting task. Despite the bleak outlook, there is still hope. The unwavering spirit of the Cameroonian people, their resilience in the face of adversity, provides a glimmer of optimism. The growing international attention on the crisis, while slow and often inadequate, offers a chance for external pressure to push for meaningful change. The road to peace will require compromise and a genuine commitment from all stakeholders. The Cameroonian government must acknowledge and address the legitimate grievances of the Anglophone population, moving beyond rhetoric to implement concrete reforms that address the historical injustices and ensure equal rights and opportunities for all citizens. The international community has a crucial role to play in supporting a peaceful resolution to the crisis. This includes providing humanitarian assistance to those affected by the conflict, mediating between the warring parties, and holding perpetrators of human rights abuses accountable. The future of Cameroon's Anglophone regions remains uncertain. However, amidst the violence and despair, the enduring hope for a just and lasting peace continues to flicker. Achieving this peace will require courage, compassion, and a collective effort from all those who believe in a future where dialogue triumphs over division.